Although I spend a fair amount of my time looking at magazines and books on architecture and interiors for inspiration primarily, and also just to see what is being done currently. I also look at a lot of contemporary fine art photography to see what artists are doing, specifically with architecture, but just in general. This is an image by Robert Frank, who produced a book in the 1950s called The Americans, and it was not a critically well-received book. The public didn't like it either. They thought that his view of America was harsh, and yet it has endured as one of the classic photography books of the 20th century. This image in particular I find very interesting for its framing, the way that the trees are cropped, and the treatment of the architecture. The raking light coming in from the right is not the kind of thing that we're used to seeing with architecture, and that makes it interesting to me. Robert Frank's work has never dealt with architecture specifically per se, but the built environment is certainly something that has figured in his work. Here we have the Metropolitan Life building located behind a magazine rack, and visually they're all part of the same thing. There's no hierarchy in his photography. The magazine rack is as important as the Metropolitan Life building. It's all just a part of our environment. This is by Lee Friedlander, who isn't generally thought of as being an architectural photographer, but architecture has played a part in his photography as well. He recently published a book called Sticks and Stones, which is entirely about architecture, but his idiosyncratic view of it. This is an uncharacteristically straight-on shot of a house by him. I say uncharacteristic because very often he has elements in the frame that would be perceived as interrupting the view. And here we have it, the view being absolutely direct. The only thing that's maybe a little, well, there are a couple of things that are unusual about it. One is that there's been no attempt to correct perspective, and the very top of the house has been cropped off by the frame, and all of this is deliberate. This is more typical of Friedlander's work in that there's a lot going on. We have the architecture of New York, and in Las Vegas. We see cars, and there are traffic lights, and we also see the interior of his car and side view mirror. More information in it. It's just a loaded picture, and is very typical of his work. This is by Louis Baltz, who in the 70s produced a series called Industrial Parks of Irvine, California, and his intention was to explore this industrial landscape that is now so prevalent. This is by Judy Fiskin, who has photographed houses primarily extensively. She makes exquisite little prints. This is probably, the original print of this is probably no more than 2 by 3 inches approximately, and is as much about the trees, even though we barely see the trees. They dominate the frame. We don't see them in their entirety, but the 2 palm trees and the 1 shadow are the strongest elements in this picture. This is by Sebastião Salgado, and it's a copper mine I believe in Bolivia. It's populated by thousands of workers, and Salgado has a social conscience, and while it's a mine and not necessarily considered architecture, I think the fact that it houses so many people, it really does qualify. This is by Joe Deal, who's been looking at at urban sprawl primarily, and his strategy is to always be looking down. You just won't see the horizon in virtually any Joe Deal photograph. This is by Philip Traeger, an East Coast photographer. And I like this image in particular because of its very direct look at this very plain house with these extraordinary trees on either side of it. This is by Tom Barrell, who uses arcane processes to come up with his images. This has been made with a Polaroid negative. We can tell that by the deterioration of the image around the frame. I like this one in particular of a power plant with its very dark stacks and the receding skyline in the background going back to the Empire State Building, which is light, barely there, but certainly a presence. This is another Tom Barrell of the Chrysler Building seen through the windows of a vacant office or apartment, I don't know which. But the Chrysler Building, although it's relatively small in the frame, certainly holds its own with the light coming in through the windows. This is Brooklyn Bridge by Thomas Bliss, photographed in the rain, taking advantage of the reflection in the boardwalk of the pylon. This is Hong Kong, photographed by Michael Kenna. And Michael Kenna travels extensively. These windmills are in Spain. And great relationship between the landscape and the buildings. And this is taken in Japan. We're looking directly at the sun, and what this suggests is that it's not likely that we would have light in the wall facing us, except that perhaps he has a camera-mounted flash on, which is something generally I don't like, but there's sometimes no other way to get light into areas. And it's kind of an interesting, mysterious image. This is by Fred Conrad, who's photographed a lot of architecture for the New York Times. I like this perspective looking straight up through a stairwell with these pipes running through it. This is by Diane Cook, and she's taken advantage of a puddle in the foreground reflecting part of the bridge, which has been strangely cut off by the frame. This is by Hiroshi Sugimoto, a Japanese photographer who's lived in New York for many years, and this is one in a series of images that he made in the 1970s of movie theaters, and his strategy was to photograph them with a large format camera, which he would open the shutter of at the beginning of a film and leave it open until the film was finished. The only light that would illuminate the space was that which was projected on the screen, which turned white because of the repeated images hitting it. This is also by Hiroshi Sugimoto from a series on architecture that he did a number of years ago. This is the Seagram's building with the Citibank building in Manhattan behind it. And this soft focus is deliberate. This is by Stephen Shore, who was one of the first two photographers to have a one-person show of nothing but color photography at the Museum of Modern Art. Up to that time, color had been considered second-rate to black and white, and from the point that this work was shown, that ended. Shore's work is very reminiscent of Walker-Evans, and deliberately so. He looked at Evans' work a great deal for framing, for subject matter. This is also by Stephen Shore. As is this. This is by William Eggleston, who was the other photographer working in color who received a one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art. His point of view is more idiosyncratic than Stephen Shore's, more personal in nature, and not above some humor. This building looks like it's eating the skyline in the background. He also gained access to Graceland and was allowed to photograph in the house, but only at night. Not really his favorite way of working, but it was what was available to him. And he managed to find angles that were very much a part of his style, though. This is by Joel Meyerowitz, who photographed in Cape Cod year after year after year after visiting there in the summers, and produced a group of photographs called Cape Light. Very simple, elegant color images. And at times he was rewarded for his patience, and also caught a little bit of luck with lightning. This is by Len Gentile, a great color photographer. It happens to be the top of the World Trade Center, made during the 1970s. And Gentile also photographed the great old mansions of Newport, Rhode Island. In this case, Marble House. And we have wonderful light being projected through stained glass windows into this space, which then looks into the next room. It has depth to it, and this is Long Island City by Len Gentile, with these what look like huge stone slabs in the foreground, with the skyline of New York in the background, taking advantage of the large puddle in the foreground and the Pepsi-Cola sign and a beautiful sky. Gentile has also made a habit of recording murals wherever he finds them, and this one in Arco, Idaho. And I just love the air conditioner and the light fixture in the middle of the landscape. This is by Richard Misrach, and what appears to be, or should be a room is in fact not a room at all, but just tables and chairs. Implied architecture. He also photographs real architecture. And in this case, monumental buildings, but with a person in the middle of the frame who still commands our attention. This is by Michael Eastman. And I like the palm tree stuck dead center, and those orange pylons seem to work well with the facade. Here Eastman has managed to make a very humble house look quite monumental, with an amazing sky in the background, but beautiful light hitting the front of this house. This is by John DeVola, who it's part of a series that he did on vandalism. He went into houses that had been abandoned at the side of the ocean, and he documented the results of the vandalism, and then began contributing his own vandalism. The paintings on the painting on the wall, the squiggles, are in fact his. And what he's done here is use a camera-mounted strobe on his camera to illuminate the interior and balance it with the ocean and the sky outside. This is also by John DeVola, who more recently has photographed houses on the edge of Los Angeles County. This is by Thomas Struth, German photographer who studied with the Beckers, and architecture figures largely in his work. This is a relatively straightforward image of a building with two buildings on either side of it. Again, this is classical composition: foreground, middle ground, background. And this is more like the kind of work that he's become well known for, photographing in public spaces, churches and museums in particular, mostly in Europe. And prints of these images command very high prices in the art market. This is by Michael Wolff, who has done a series of images where high-rises completely fill the frame. He's also photographed them at night, and he's traveled the world looking for this phenomenon. This is by Todd Hito, part of a series that he did on houses, suburban houses at night, and they have a very ominous quality to them.